What was growing up like? Was mom and dad around?
Mom and dad, yeah, my parents were married when I was born. My dad, so I have this obsession with the movie Scarface. Everybody that's close to me knows. And the reason is, well, for several reasons. One, that story of like how he got to this country is very familiar for us, for Cubans. Like everybody has a grandfather, an aunt, a mother, a dad, a sister, a brother that came literally the same way he did, like in 1980 on a boat, nothing but the clothes on their backs. So that's actually how my mother got here to this country, in the Mario boat lift in 1980. So she came with my grandfather, and you know how like Tony was in a tent, like until they figured out what to do with him, they would stay in a tent like under I-95.
Yep.
That was my mother, So it was really cool to see a fictionalized version, but like it was part of our story, our people, what we went through and stuff. So that movie has always represented something really special to me because of that. And then my father, so my mom came when she was 8 years old. So she's a little more Americanized. She actually considers America her home. Like even if things changed in Cuba tomorrow, she would never go back. My father came when he was about 22. He has a pretty crazy story too. He escaped Cuba with a fake Venezuelan passport, and he went to Panama, stayed in Panama for about a month, took a bus to the Mexican-Texan border, crossed into El Paso where my aunt was waiting for him. And then that's how he got into the country in 1988. Very different Mexican border. There was no fence, no border patrol. He said, bro, it was a river. Yeah. You just crossed.
That's wild.
And that's it. Yeah. Everybody thought he was a Mexican. It's like a Cuban. It was so funny the way. And my father's very animated how he tells the story. So yeah. My culture, my roots are very, very much a part of my identity. Especially growing up in Miami. My first language is Spanish.
Yeah.
I knew no one knows who this is, but the Cuban Thomas Jefferson, his name is Jose Marti. I knew who that was before Thomas Jefferson was, things like that. You know what I mean? Culture was such a big part of my upbringing. I can't imagine being raised anywhere else really, because Miami's the only city that's really like that. I call it the independent country of Miami because you need a passport to go down there. It's like a whole nother country. It's not even part of the United States. But yeah, so born and raised in Miami, Cuban parents on both sides, full Cuban family. As a kid, I was always the translator, translating things for my cousins or my aunt or my dad. I'll tell you a funny story. I was 7. My dad's a truck driver, so I used to go to New York a lot, actually, Bronx, Hunts Point, all that stuff. So it was a group of nine Cubans, all driving trucks, all driving big semi-trucks, 18-wheelers. And we pull over at this Waffle House. And I'm a 7-year-old kid, and I have to translate for everybody, right? So my dad, I translate for my dad's friends. And then there's this one of his friends who in Spanish tells me, I got it. You don't have to translate. And we're all bro, what the f*** is this guy about to say? And the lady's yeah, can I take your order? He's let me have a steak and eggs. And we're here we go. Here it comes. How do you want your steak? Big fire. Get the f*** out of here, bro. Dude, we roasted that guy for the whole, big fire on the CV, big fire. It was so, dude, yeah. So it's things like that. And another thing about Cubans, our sense of humor is we're always laughing. We're always making fun of each other. You know how good we boys are? That's that energy is no holds barred,
I love that.
Yeah.
I like that kind of energy and that kind of humor.
Definitely. Yeah.
You're just making fun of one another.
Yeah.
But you
100%.
You know what I'm saying? You're comfortable with yourself and your friends and the love is there. It's just,
100%.
You got to have that fun, cracking jokes on one another.
Definitely.
It's important. And that's culture for you guys.
Yeah. That being hospitable.
Yeah.
Right. Women, especially older women in our culture, they're very as soon as you walk in the house, they offer you food, they offer you something to drink, making sure it's culture. It's just we're hospitable people. And that's another thing. I never would have gotten that experience if it wasn't for the city I grew up in. I'm grateful to Miami for a lot of things. I'm blessed. So,
that's awesome.
So yeah, I had a lot of awesome parts of my childhood. Some not so awesome. When I was younger, my dad kind of fooled around. He was kind of a wild guy, he was into selling drugs and that kind of shit. And he still has a drug habit that he hasn't really kicked. That it's been an ongoing thing throughout my whole life that, he's my father and I love him, but, addiction's a dark thing. So
What kind of drugs is he doing?
cocaine, mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he end up getting caught selling drugs? Or?
Nah, he quit pretty early. He wasn't doing it for too long. And the funny thing is, from what I was told, from what I've been told, because I was so little, I really don't remember anything. He was very. The reason I've been straight edge for most of my life. I mean, in high school I did drugs and shit, but it was a very short lived. Was because of my father, because I would see him. I remember looking at my father in parties and stuff like that, how he'd always get offered a beer and he'd be like, no, I don't drink, and I was like, oh man, that's so cool. Dad doesn't drink. He doesn't. And that's the reason, that was like my example of why I never did drugs growing up, that why I thought it was stupid. And then I remember as a teenager finding out he had a drug habit, and I was like, man, this guy was like my inspiration to not do drugs and not do anything like my whole life. And then I find out it's like finding out Santa Claus isn't real.
Yeah.
It sucked. But I try not to judge him for it. We all have our demons. It sucks because, he's let me and my sister down a lot. We've been through a lot with him, but what are we going to do? At this point, we're grown and we kind of we're there for him when we can, and we can't. It is what it is. So, but yeah, I was 4. I want to say it was just a few years. Yeah, like maybe when I was a baby until I was about 3 or 4 is when he kind of got out of that scene. He became a legit truck driver, just driving long trips. And that was good. We used to bond as kids. He used to take me like spring break and summer vacations, all that stuff. I'd love to hop on the truck with him and stuff. And my mom was a waitress. That's basically how we got by, And yeah, growing up, typical Cuban family, all that stuff. I remember my earliest memories of my parents. This is kind of weird. I remember being a kid and like wanting my parents to get a divorce because they used to fight so much that it was annoying. And then they like having to pick sides and all that shit as a kid. Like I remember that very vividly. And when they finally decided to get a divorce, I was so relieved. I was like, oh my God, thank God I'm not gonna have to deal with this shit anymore, In the introduction of my book, I actually tell the story of the night they split up. And that kind of led into how I saw Scarface for the first time and everything, funny enough. So my sister I have a sister that's a year and 8 months older than me. And she was never in the house for whatever reason. She was typically like with my aunt or a cousin or whatever. And I was always home seeing everything that went down. And then this one night, my dad is like trying to get a hold of my mom and like she's not coming home. And I'm pretty sure my mom was either working or out doing something, but he's flipping out trying to get a hold of her, right? So then he pulls up to a payphone back then, right? He pulls up to a payphone and like makes me call her and tell her mom, Dad's trying to get a hold of you. And then my mom's like, bro, what the fuck? Why is he making you call me? And I kind of agreed with her. So my dad took me home and we waited for my mom to get home. And my mom came in hot. Like I heard she like kicked in the door, even though she had a key. Like there was glass on that door. So the glass, it swung open, that glass shattered. And then my dad ran out of the room and they went, I didn't see it, but I heard glass breaking. Like, I'm sure they were throwing shit at each other. They were probably like fighting each other. And I struggled with this for a long time because I felt like I abandoned my mother. But consciously, I remember what happened that night. I was trying to get my dad out of the house. So what I did was I was like, all right, if I tell him I'll leave with him, then I'll get him out of the house and he won't hurt my mom. Even though I don't know who was hurting who because I didn't see the fight. So what I did was I was like, all right, yeah, and then thank God my cousin, who I'll tell you a whole nother story about him later. Thank God he was there, and then he just took us to my grandma's house, And then later that night, my mom would probably pick me up later. So I'm like, all right. So my mom shows up with my cousin Lewis. My cousin Lewis, to give you some background, he was like this street kid, extracurricular activities included like stealing car stereos, selling rims, selling weed, that kind of shit. He was a notorious like troublemaker on his block, And when he showed up, I knew my mom wasn't fucking around. I was like, oh shit, Lewis is here. Okay. She brought some backup in case anything goes down, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember he had this super dope Cadillac. He had this gold Cadillac 1988 DeVille with like these, you know, those old school, like with the button.
Yeah,
you
yeah, of
hit
course.
the button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hydraulics.
Yeah, all that shit. Right?
Yeah.
So they show up, they pick me up, and then we ended up staying with Lewis for a few months. And then Lewis ended up moving in with us. And this kid played Scarface every fucking day, bro. You know what every day is? He's the one that I have to thank him because he's the one that got me into my obsession with the mobster movies. Because he showed Goodfellas, Godfather, you know what I mean? Casino, all that. But Scarface was the one he would play like every day. We named our bird Yayo, bro. Our parrot's name was Yayo. Like legit. Because his favorite line was Chi-Chi, Chi-Chi, get the Yayo. You know? So what inspires me about that movie is like, because around that time, I couldn't think of anybody in my community who looked like me, who spoke like me, who had done something significant with their life. You know what I mean? So I see this movie, this Cuban guy named Tony, who comes over here and he basically is like, comes to Miami and he's making like hundreds of millions of dollars within a year or two of being here. So it was inspiring because of that. Obviously, I knew I wasn't going to deal drugs or kill people, but that's kind of like the market left on me. That was the first time I understood like you can get to a certain level in life if you put your mind to it. You know what I mean? Like if you're willing to do certain things, like put in the work and not just talk about it. Like if you're willing to do it, that was my first glimpse into anything like that, you know, as a kid. And believe it or not, Lewis was actually a really good influence on me because at the time, since my dad wasn't really around, I needed kind of like a male role model. And he was good in a lot of ways, meaning like he didn't take shit. He showed me how to stand up for myself, that kind of stuff. He was pretty family oriented. Like he protected his own. So there was a lot of qualities that he, aside from being like a little gangster, you know, that he was, he did a lot of good, you know, being around.
Almost that father role, kind of in a
like
way.
An older
Mentor.
Yeah. I would say like an older brother because he's only like 6 or 7 years older than me. So yeah, definitely like an older brother thing. And I consider him, and he has siblings that I grew up with too. I consider them all like older siblings. They're good people. They taught me a lot of valuable lessons. Good people, you know?
Yeah.
That kind of.
Yeah. What was high school like, and what kind of career were you thinking of pursuing after high school?
My earliest memories of a career or money was just anything that made a lot of money. My goal was I remember my earliest memory or concept of like luxury or having something nice. I must have been like 6 and a car drove past us and it was a convertible car. And I was like, Mom, what's that called? And she's like, oh, that's a convertible. And I was like, all right, I'm going to have that car when I'm grown up, you know? So like, I remember wanting these cool things that we didn't have. And I felt like, sounds weird, but I felt like that was my purpose. Like my purpose is to be the guy in the family that is able to do this for us. You know, that's able to take us out of this situation and be able to like get everybody, you know, help mom get a house or a car or whatever she needs, help grandma out whenever she needs some money, put her up in a nice place so she doesn't have to go to a retirement home. Like that kind of stuff. I just felt in my earliest memories, I was like 4 or 5. And I changed my mind a lot about what I wanted to do. First, I wanted to be an architect. Then I wanted to be a lawyer. I was stuck on lawyer for a long time because every time I ran into a lawyer, they were balling. They were just like, you know what I mean? Because in Miami, there's not that I grew up around criminals, but it's very easy to see like who's up to no good, you know? So I'd always run into lawyers and all the lawyers were defense attorneys. So I was like, oh, okay. So people pay you to get you out of jail. All right.
And
so
you make a lot of money doing it.
Right. So my thing was, all right, I know I don't want to break the law and end up like some of my cousins or some of my friends because there was a plethora of idiots making bad decisions back then. And I grew up in some rough neighborhoods. So it was like, all right, I don't want to go to jail like these guys, right? But they'll pay me a lot of money to keep them out of jail. So I'm going to be a defense attorney, you know? And that was my plan for a long time. Like all throughout, I even have, funny enough, I'm wearing my high school ring and there's a gavel on the side of it.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, yeah, that's my thing. You know, that's what I'm going to do.
Yep.
And then somewhere along the line, I realized that like I didn't understand the concept of like entrepreneurship or any of that kind of stuff. But somewhere along the line, I kind of realized like, oh, there's people who are successful and make money who don't necessarily go to college or like have a traditional job. They own a company that makes them money. Or I started understanding like, oh, business ownership, having a job, all these different ways of making money. So that started happening in high school. Like I started understanding, oh, like I have an uncle named Manny. He lives up in Connecticut. He lives right by, not too far from me in studio. And he has a barbershop and he's like the only entrepreneur in my entire family. And he's had a barbershop for like 40 years. So I understood. I was like, oh, wow, entrepreneurship. Okay. So I want to be like that. Like I want to own something that makes me money. I don't want to work for somebody, you know? So that's high school. And then my brain was weird. I saw a lot of crime and criminals around me, even though I never participated, but I understood like what to take from them. Again, the whole thing with Scarface and the gangster movies, what I get from those people is like they have ambition, they have drive, they have determination, they have a lot of good things. They're just applying it to the wrong vehicle. You know what I mean? Like, okay, don't shoot people, you know?
Yeah, of course.
Don't sell drugs. Don't do those things. Like open a business. You know what I mean? You're a good negotiator. All right, but go negotiate like for a real company. Go open like, you know, go sell cars for a while or something. I don't know. Open a car dealership. Go apply that, all your good qualities, apply that to something legitimate. I mean, and I've been blessed because ever since I was little, I've been able to draw the positive from the negative, you know, always. So yeah, that's kind of, I started realizing all that around high school. Right around this time, my mom meets my stepfather, which he was another wild influence in my life. Yeah.
What was that like for you, another man coming into your mom's life who's not your dad?
At first, like every kid, I was like, I didn't like a man.
This dude?
Not even him specifically. I just didn't like my mother being around men.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm her son, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm good. Like, no. Obviously, she didn't ask me because she didn't need my permission. But yeah, I didn't want men, like the thought of a man, like you're not worthy of my mother.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That kind of stuff.
Did you feel a sense of, you talked about being that provider for your family, like you had that mentality from a young age. Did you feel like once your parents got divorced, you had to take on the role of protecting your mom from men as well?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
That's a lot for a child. Well, you weren't like a child, but still.
I was like a 12, 13-year-old kid. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot for any kid to take on.
And the crazy thing is that my mother looks really young. My mother's, in actuality, she's only about 20, 21 years older than me. She had me young. So back then when I was 13, 12, she was like in her early 30s. So she was young. So when we go on the street, everybody would be like, oh, your older sister, you know? And then there'd be the jokes. There was a running joke with my friends. I'm like, oh, have you seen Nelson's mom? I got in a couple of fistfights with some of my friends. I was like, bro, you say some shit about my mom again, I'm going to knock you the fuck out. Like, don't. And they think I'm joking. And then they bust the joke again. And I'd be like, okay, I warned you. Bah!
Whap!
Whap! Oh, dude, what the fuck? I fucking told you. Don't say that shit about my mother. I would never say that about your mother. Why would you say that about my mother? You know? And it was weird because it was only my mom. Like, if you cracked a joke at my sister, I'd be like, well. You know, I don't know. I always felt that way about my mom.
Yeah.
Part of it was she sacrificed so much for us. Like she worked 3 jobs. I remember before she met my stepdad, after she got divorced from my dad, she worked 3 jobs, bro. She was working newspaper route in the middle of the night. She was waitressing at Denny's during the day. And then she had a 3rd part-time job at Subway. So she was like grinding. My mom taught me how to be a man, dude. Like she taught me work ethic. Don't fucking lie to people. Don't take shit from anybody. Don't take handouts. Earn everything you get. All these lessons my mom taught me. Like I can never repay what she did for us. You know what I mean? So the way I kind of like, the way I saw it is like, mom's going through a lot. So just make sure at least like you don't add to her plate. You know? And if you see her like stuff come in that she kind of shouldn't be dealing with, just, you know, hey, you know, get out of here, not here, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So
high school starts coming around. My stepfather comes into the picture, and my stepfather is a notorious gangster. Notorious. Like he had just done a 6-year bid. in the feds, and he had no intentions of changing his ways. So he did all kinds of stuff. Sometimes he'd rob drug dealers. Sometimes he'd sell drugs. Sometimes I remember I heard this one story. Allegedly, I never witnessed it. Obviously, he followed this guy around for 3 days, learned his whole schedule. Apparently, the guy was the owner of a jewelry shop. He sat in a car and followed this guy like an undercover detective for 3 days. And on the third day, he found an opportunity where the guy had put a bag in his trunk. And the guy went inside the shop really quick and wasn't really paying attention to the car. He waited about 30 seconds. The guy popped out of the car. My stepfather got out of his car, popped the trunk, took the bag, hopped in his car, took off. There was like 50 grand in the bag. And he would do shit like that all the time. And this is how he made a living. My house burnt down. So I'll tell you a crazy story. My house burnt down maybe 6 months after him and my mom started dating. So he calls my mom. Me and my mom are visiting my great-grandmother. She was like a really important figure in my life. Like she raised all of us. Anyway, so my stepfather's like, yo, the house is burning down. And my mom went over there. It was crazy. He tried to like save Yayo. Remember Yayo?
Mm-hmm.
He tried saving the bird. He died in the fire. Unfortunately, it sucks. But yeah, that's when I started going back to your original question about protecting my mother. After he risked his life to like save our pet is when he gained my respect. I was like, all right, this guy loves us because.
Were you exposed to some of the things that he was doing though? The criminal acts that he was
not like,
or you find out later? Not
immediately, but eventually it was like,
you can't hide it.
Yeah, no, he did. And he wasn't trying to. The only reason I didn't know immediately is because I wasn't like asking questions.
Yeah.
Eventually it was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, this is who I am. It is what it is.
Yeah. So after high school, what do you end up doing?
Well, high school, right towards the middle end of high school, in 2008, everybody remembers that year, right? So I was one of the foreclosures. What had happened right before that was my stepfather, obviously, I mean, there's only so many times you can break the law and like get away with it. So he gets caught. Somebody that was working for the feds had they had a wiretap on his phone, and they had recorded him saying like they were planning this robbery, and the guy was an FBI informant. They had him on tape for like a month, just planning out every detail of the robbery, what they were gonna do. And then the day of the robbery, he pulls out of the house and he goes up to this gas station to put gas, and then the feds just jump out, and that's it. He got an 18-year sentence. That was over. So my mom loses him. My great-grandmother, which is her grandma, dies. We go through a foreclosure, 2 car repossessions. It was a bad year. It was rough. And my mom's like mental health isn't doing good around that time. My sister kind of isn't in the picture, so I have to deal with a lot of all that stuff. I end up getting a job. We move into a trailer park. I have a special hate in my heart for trailer parks. Like that fucking place, like crackheads breaking into our trailer, stealing all our shit. People I don't really like. Shady figures. Like I hated that place, bro. And I ended up getting a job, and my mom decides to move to West Palm Beach. We live in Miami, so I didn't want to go to West Palm Beach halfway through my senior year. So I decided to move out on my own, and I'm working at McDonald's full time. So my schedule at the time was from get up at 6 a.m, go to school at 7:30, finish at 2:30, go to work at 3, finish at 11, get home at midnight, and do it every day. Like it sucked. Yeah, my life was fucking miserable, bro. Around this time is when I kind of started getting an idea, or like realizing I had kind of like a food problem. When I was younger, another thing about my culture, that's like how women show affection. They cook for you, so grandma cooks for you, your aunt cooks for you. So it wasn't a big deal, but like right towards the end of high school, I started gaining more. Like I was a big kid, but I wasn't like massive. And towards the end of high school is kind of like when I see that kind of happening, like I start gaining more weight. And that's when I realized I have a problem. I'm like, okay. So I never got really attached to drugs. So is my thing food? Like, am I a food addict? And then that was the first time I kind of had that conversation in my head right at the tail end of high school, you know? And it was weird having that conversation and kind of coming to the conclusion that food and sugar and all that stuff can be addictive, you know? You don't have to be addicted to heroin or alcohol. Food, it's worse in my opinion, you know?
So I go to self-help meetings. I'm, in sobriety, as you know, and they say that the problem lies within here, inside. It's an internal thing.
100%.
The symptoms of, that void you're trying to fill inside are gambling, drinking, drugs, sex, food, whatever it is. Adrenaline junkie.
Right.
We're all cut from the same fabric. They're just different symptoms of the disease.
Right.
And so, yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from.
Definitely. And up until that point, I didn't know what anxiety was. No idea. That's not a thing in my culture. Like, I mean, it kind of is. The word exists in Spanish and everything, but like, it's not talked about like on a daily basis. And then I started realizing, like, is that what I do when I get anxious? Like, oh, that's what anxiety is. I'm like, and then I eat something and I'm like, all right, I feel better. You know, it was weird having that realization because coming to grips with the fact that a person who stuffed their face with unhealthy food in an unhealthy amount is probably doing the same thing to their health as any drug addict. It was wild to me. It was like, from eating, really? You know? And then I started doing research into like food and what's in food. And that took me down a whole rabbit hole. That was like, all the chemicals and all the bad shit that's in food, how addictive sugar is. Sugar's crazy, man. So just a quick segue. I did a 3-day fast one time and I did not realize how much it was just me wanting to eat versus being hungry. Because I finally understood, like, after having a 3-day fast, after a day and a half, I wasn't hungry anymore. Like, second, third day, I was not hungry. But I was like, I would catch myself, like, wanting, like, why do I want to eat? I'm not hungry. I could differentiate when it was the mind and the body. That was really, really, like, eye-opening,
I want to do a fast now.
You should.
I really should.
I recommend it to everybody.
Yeah, just to kind of identify that within yourself.
You'll notice it.
Understand yourself better.
Yep.
The human body. Because I feel like I just eat to eat. I mean, I will say I am lucky with genetics and I do work out and whatnot. And, but still my sugar intake is not good. It's not healthy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's in everything, bro.
I know.
It's in fucking ketchup.
Yeah.
It's in everything.
It's wild.
Oh, man. And I have the worst sweet tooth on the planet. Worst. It's not good at all, So, yeah, that was the first, getting out of high school was the first time I ever had that mental conversation where I was like, okay, all right, well, that's something to look out for, I guess. And I still kind of like was in shock. I was like, man, I tried so hard not to be like this person or that person, but I'm just doing it in a different way, Yeah. And the worst thing is food addicts. This is something I struggle with. Like people will find out you're sober, for example, and they'll try to help you. They'll be like, all right, don't put up, Kevin's sober, don't drink around him. Obviously don't,
smoke weed in front of him.
Yeah.
Sniff blow in his face.
When you're trying to like be on a diet and be disciplined with your fitness and you're an overweight dude, people don't give a fuck, bro.
No.
They don't give a fuck.
It's different.
No one cares, man. No one cares. And in Miami, like with my family members and shit, they make fun of you. They're like, I fucking eat,
It's culture. It's a way.
Yeah, man, it's terrible. So, and what I think is funny is like, throughout my life, I can remember so many situations where people were judging other people with addictions. And it was like, bro, you're like 100 pounds overweight. Why are you sitting here judging someone who has, a cocaine problem? Or why are you sitting here judging that guy that likes to go to the casino? You're the fucking same. You are exactly the same. The only difference is it's food and it's legal. And no one like frowns upon you. Because I guarantee you, if your entire family would like do an intervention the way they did with someone who had a drug problem or had a gambling problem, you'd automatically see like, oh my God, like I'm doing something wrong here. You know what I mean? So that's a societal problem. I think that's going to be even though I will say it's gotten better. Like nowadays, we are becoming a little more health conscious. You see what RFK is doing with like banning some of
the red dye.
Yeah.
Yep.
So things are moving in the right direction. But yeah, that's something. And that body positivity shit, bro, stop lying to yourself. Like I used to weigh 300 pounds. Since then, I'm down into like the 240s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's no comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like when I was 300 pounds, I couldn't bend down to tie my shoelace without being out of breath. I couldn't go up a flight of stairs without being out of breath. Buying clothes was a mission because nothing fit me. Don't stop lying to yourself with the body positivity shit. And people around you who aren't like at least trying to have that conversation with you, they don't really care about you. You know, they just want to conform and not offend you. And that's not a real friend, you know?
So you notice this about yourself, you're
Yeah.
thinking and, impulsive eating. What are some things that you started to do? You mentioned a diet, not getting support from family, society.
Yeah.
What are some other things that you did? I mean, you look great now, man.
Thanks.
You really do. And what are some things that you implemented to, start your road to recovery and get where you're at today?
Two things, just like there's a plethora of information out there. There's no excuse anymore. If you want to find something, you can find it very easily. Don't put junk food in your house, because one donut turns into two, and then two turns into the whole box. You know what I mean? Hanging around people who had the information I wanted, which, funny enough, was the same in my career. Around this time, I get into sales. I kill it. I find like that's the first time I knew what sales was, how commission structures worked, how I was like, oh, so if I do this, I get more money. The more I sell, the more I get paid. So that all kind of came together around the same time. Like me finding out I had a food issue with finding out a new career path. Like it all kind of happened at the same time. So it was funny how that all came together. So keep junk food out of the house. Stick to something simple. If you're not trying to be a bodybuilder or lift weights, like I got pretty crazy with it at one point. I was doing like, I was training MMA, I was lifting weights, I was doing, I was doing everything. I'm not doing as much now, but I'll be back on it soon. Just build a don't do too much at once because you're going to quit. Start small, start with a walk, then a jog, then maybe, if you like yoga, go do find stuff you like, and implement it into your day. Replace something I did is I would just find the healthy version of like food I liked and I'd eat that instead, So
I feel like you talked about the workout plan that you decide to go with, make sure it's not too much of a tall order.
You'll quit.
Because it'll get overwhelming. You won't do it. You 100%. Won't act on it. And then there will be no results. And no progress made. I feel like having those have your ultimate goal, but have achievable goals along the way
100%.
So that it motivates you.
Yep.
So we were talking earlier about the void inside. Did you ever go to therapy for this? Or did you do anything to help build your self-esteem? Or do you think your self-esteem was impacted?
Yeah, I mean, it was more than anything. If I try to think back to my entire life, anytime I felt the need to overeat, it was a mix of anxiety and like insecurity, like not knowing what was coming, being in a situation where I felt like I didn't have the answer. And then that made me anxious, right? Because I'm like, oh, like you're thinking about the future. They say like if you worry, you're thinking about the past. If you're anxious, you're thinking about the future.
Yeah.
So you gotta be in the present moment.
Yeah.
For me, it was that I'm always a forward thinker, and I try to what's next? Like how am I gonna do this? Which is good because you're building and you're not looking to like you're not stuck in the past. But it kind of if you don't ring yourself into the present moment, it becomes anxiety. Literally, like even talking about it, I feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's such a, like, just, you can't control the future. Like, you can't control the outcome and you can't change the past. So the only thing you have is the present moment. You know what I mean? So that's the only vehicle you can use. But yeah, for me, it was dealing with anxiety, for sure. That's what made me overeat. And aside from dealing with anxiety, it was like an easy way to just feel better. You know, when I felt like shit, or I was kind of like upset at life, or things weren't going my way, which happened often, I would just eat and I'd feel better, you know?
Did the anxiety just go away on its own?
No, it's
or
still
is
there.
it still there?
Yeah.
You have implemented tools to cope with your anxiety now.
Yeah, it's all a mental process for me. I just catch myself in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you anxious about, bro? You live a great life. Like, you know who you are as a person. You know what I mean? Like, I just, for that brief moment, I think about the things, like, I used to pray for the life I have now. Literally. That thought, that one sentence is like, anxiety's gone. Yeah, I may not be a billionaire and have like these crazy goals, but a lot of the things that, like, it was my dream to be a podcaster at one point, just to have a podcast. I have a podcast that I have, like, people message me, you know, oh my God, that episode was great. That episode with that kid Ian, or the episode with that kid Kevin, you know, like, so that kills the anxiety immediately. I just remind myself of where I am in life.
Yeah.
You know, because I tend to be like an ambitious guy. So I don't give myself credit for the things I do.
Yeah.
So being able to just come back to the present moment and actually give myself credit for what I'm actually doing, you know? Ross laughs, and he was like super humble the first time I told him this. When I was a kid, I'd be like, God, can you just send me like some old Jewish dude who's like retired and knows how to make money to teach me like about business and like about the things I'm lacking? And then I met Ross. So it's like, you know, I promise you, I used to do that. I used to pray for things, and then I have them now, you know? Yeah.
How did you and Ross Mandel meet?
Well, let's get into that. So let's get into my 20s, right?
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So
jumping ahead.
No, we're good. We're on the timeline. So I get into sales. I kick ass. I do really well. Over the course of 6 years, I build a sales team of 350 agents and about 7,000 paying clients.
Wow.
We do really well. I start making money. That company was great for me because it was really good for my mindset. Like, it taught me a lot about like the mechanics of becoming, like, you have to become better in order to get better results. You know, so it taught me a lot about self-improvement and that kind of stuff. Yeah. It was really good for me. That company falls apart because the owner had a bad cocaine habit. Here we go. It's such a cliche thing in Miami to be a cokehead, bro. It's it's everywhere. But anyway, that company falls apart. I end up going back to work, like the workforce, and getting a 9-to-5, which was horrible, Kevin. That must have been the most miserable I was in my entire life. But then when I first got there, and I hated the fact that I had to get a regular job, what came to mind was, like, I had been reading books, going to seminars, you know, that kind of stuff, like just improving myself. So I kind of brought that mindset into the corporate job. And I said, well, if I work hard, if I give good ideas, if I don't complain, if I work extra hours, you know, by default, I'll have to get promoted and make more money. So at first it starts working. I get promoted pretty fast, but then middle managers start looking bad because, like, the new kid is working harder than everybody else. So they kind of like start pushing me down.
Isn't that absurd?
It's ridiculous.
How that works.
It's terrible.
It's ridiculous.
Corporate America is probably one of the most toxic environments, like traditional corporate America. You can find good companies to work for now, but yeah, people are envious and that kind of, it sucks, you know? So I have that whole experience of like having a regular corporate job. And at this point, I'm broke. I'm making like $15 an hour. When you go from being a high paid salesperson to getting a regular job and getting paid $15 an hour, it's horrible. It's night and day. It's like, so what ends up happening with me is I get offered this super, well, I'll set it up. I'm broke as shit. I'm trying to make extra money. And this guy approaches me and he's like, hey, what kind of insurance do you guys have? And I'm like, I don't even know, man. I just whip out my insurance card and I'm like, this kind. He's like, oh, okay, well, listen, if you want to make some extra money, pass by our clinic and, you know, we can maybe work something out. And it's a notorious thing in Miami that there's a bunch of fraudulent like clinics. That's just a thing. Miami's a fraud capital of the world, by the way. Fraud capital of the world. I'm not proud of that at all. I came to find that out later after I got indicted that Miami was a fraud capital of the world, which is crazy. But what ends up happening is I'm kind of desperate. I don't really ask too many questions. I show up to some clinic. I sign a bunch of papers. The guy calls me after I finish and he pays me $800 in cash.
800?
$800. So I was like, oh shit. Okay, this is great. And he's like, oh, how many people do you know with this insurance? And I'm like, everyone at work. How big is your company? It's probably like 500 of us. He's like, well, I'll work something out with you if you bring some people, So he started paying me money and I start taking this just, again, me getting into these situations. I'm just like, yeah, like trying to do the best. Now I turn into the people I'm not trying to be like.
How many people did you send him from your company? Are you allowed to share that?
Yeah. I'm gonna get into that. So I start turning into the people I don't want to be like. I start applying my good qualities to a negative vehicle. And it just spirals. One person turns into two into 20, 20 into 40, 40 into 60. Over the span of a year and a half, I probably have like $500,000 in cash go through my hands.
$500,000?
Yeah.
You made $500,000 in a year and a half.
I didn't make it because a lot of that I had to pay out to people.
Yeah.
But physically, cash that went to touch these hands, I had $500,000. How much of that I made, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Yeah.
I made a lot.
Yeah. And that's on top of your job.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, on top of whatever I made 9 to 5. So, yeah, I mean, life's good at this point, right? Like, I'm taking vacations and doing nice things. I have different kind of women are hanging around me.
Yeah. Well, how long? So that goes on for a year and a half.
Yeah.
How does it end?
Well, the guy who kind of introduced me to the whole thing, my plug, my connect, he stops answering the phone one day, which is very unlike him because I'm his money machine, right? Like when I call, it's because you're gonna make money. So he never ever he literally picked up the phone and been like, hey, what's up, brother? Like I'm at the DMV. Hey, what's up, brother? I'm on a date with my wife. Hey, what's up, brother? Yeah. Like every time. So I said, something's wrong. He's not answering the phone. Somehow I get a phone from a friend of his. I get a phone call from a friend of his. And basically she warned me that she's like, hey, we got to meet up. I was like, this is weird if she's asking me to meet up. She never asked me to meet up. I don't even know how she got my number. So we meet up and she's like, listen, the FBI broke down this guy's door. Like he's in prison right now. And I don't know what's going to happen, but he's not coming out anytime soon. So the guy ends up being involved in some other scam that he was running. Not what I was involved in, but some other shit. And that guy's facing like 15 years in jail. So what happens is he basically he tells the FBI, wait, no, I'm involved in a bunch of other shit. Let me tell you about all the other shit I'm involved in. And then that's how my case got blown wide open because of him. Because he was the middleman between people like me who would bring the patients to the clinic and the clinic itself. So he was literally the middle point in the whole operation. So once they caught him and he gave everybody up, everybody went down. Now, the crazy thing is, I don't go to prison and nothing happens to me when he gets arrested. This is 2018. So I figured, I was like, all right, he went to jail. I'm going to stop doing this, right? Because he, not only was he the connect, but it's a good sign to stop, But of course, what happens, one of his people approached me and like an idiot, I kept doing it with the other guy. Should have never done that. But anyway, eventually that guy goes to jail. Same thing happens. Nothing happens to me. That's maybe like an extra 6 months. At that point, I stop. I really do stop. What happens there at that point is I go legit. My friend, I quit my job and I go open a legitimate company, like a real business. It was a medical marijuana doctor's office. It was right around the time medical marijuana became legal in Florida. So we help people get their medical marijuana cards. And that business does well because I basically turn all my focus to that. And, same thing, same kind of practices and everything. We turn that business in 4 years into like 4,000 paying patients. And it goes really well. We actually draw a strategic plan to go public and all this stuff. But then the pandemic hits, right? And then a year into the pandemic is when the FBI comes banging on my door, bro. So 4 years after the guy got arrested is when the FBI came and arrested me. Their excuse was like the pandemic, slowed things down, blah, 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 all that. So I'll tell you the story of how I got arrested. It's pretty wild. So I come back from Colombia. I'm like on a high, right? That month I had made a ton of money legally. This is all legal. It had nothing to do with that scam. I made all that money legally. I go to this vacation on Colombia, you know. Those of you that know the stories about Colombia, you know what I mean? So I go to Colombia. I come back on a Monday. That Thursday, I get a phone call from a phone number I don't recognize. I turn my phone off and I go back to sleep. Mind you, it's 5:30 in the morning. Someone comes and knocks on my door. And I open my door. My aunt is my landlord. And my aunt's telling me in Spanish, hey, the cops are outside. They're looking for you. I was like, the cops? It's been 4 years, Kevin. It's been 4 years since I did that. So I'm not even I'm like, why are they arresting me? Like, I wasn't even thinking about that whole clinic scam and all that shit. So I walk out, 8 City of Miami cops here, 8 City of Miami cops here, 4 FBI cars in front of my house. Channel 7 News is recording me. I'll give you the clip of me getting arrested. I have it. Dude, and it's 5:30 in the morning. I'm like, bro, what the fuck? What am I, Osama bin Laden? Am I on like the top wanted list of the FBI? So I hand my cell phone to my aunt. I turn around. I start backing up. And they take me. They don't read me my Miranda rights, nothing. I said, I just didn't want to get shot. I was like, all right, fuck it. I'll let them take me and I'll figure this shit out later. So they took me to the FBI headquarters. And as they start bringing other people in that got arrested, I was like, bro, no fucking way am I sitting in an FBI headquarters over some clinic scam, bro. Is this really happening right now? And yeah, that's what happened. 4 years after, you know, it's crazy. It's wild.
So I'm assuming, yeah, they told you because of the pandemic, it slowed things down, whatever. But They were just building a case over that
Pretty
time.
much. Yeah, I was like the last person to get arrested, which made no sense because they had all the like owners of the clinics. They had all the top people and they did it backwards. Typically, you would arrest the small fish and work your way up. In that case, since they had the guy, they already had these people. They just arrested like the small fish just because they could. It really made no sense.
Were they saying that you did more? Like, were the people who ratted on you saying you did more than what you really did just to try to get themselves a lighter sentence?
Yeah. In the indictment, you would have thought I was a criminal mastermind. You know, recruiter. He was a recruiter in a conspiracy to rob health insurance. Like, bro, it sounded terrible. I read it and I was like, is this me? Is this like, get out of here? These prosecutors build a case against you and they make it seem like, dude, really, for real. The feds don't play. The feds don't lose. So I was out on bond for about a year and a half. And right after I got arrested, the day after I got arrested, I'm home. I lose my business because I'm banned from working in healthcare for the rest of my life. So I lose my business. My partner sells, we had a handshake deal. So my partner sells the company and gives me nothing. Right? I spent every dime I had on my lawyer. In spite of that being legal, clean money, every dime I had to spend on my lawyer. So I literally had nothing. Like, I went from 2 days earlier being a successful business owner to 2 days after being some fucking loser who's broke and under a federal indictment. And I said, wow, all I had could be so easily lost. None of that meant anything. Like, if I died tomorrow, there's no real proof I was here. And that was a crazy question. Like, that was a crazy realization, you know, to have in my head. Like, if I die tomorrow, no one will know I was alive in like 2 generations. You know, my mom won't remember me, but... And that made me really think about what I wanted to do with my life, man. Like, I really had to think and be like, man, like, what do I want to do with my life? Mind you, I'm out on bond, so I could go to prison any second. I don't know what's going to happen. So I decided to write a book because I figured, like everybody, I was always into reading books, and all the big people in history have like some book written about them. So I said, fuck it. If I die tomorrow, somebody could read this book and they'll be like, all right, you know, this guy was cool. So I wrote the book. I published it in March of 2022. I had a little book launch. Things went well, made a few $1,000s that night. So from there, I was like, all right, what else can I do? Like, how can I expand on this kind of stuff? So I started a podcast in June of 2022. So yeah.
So what's the name of your book?
The Montana method.
The Montana method. So people can find it
Yeah.
online.
Amazon.
Awesome. And when you write this book, when you're out on bond, when did you end up going to prison?
So I'm out on bond from July of 2021 until January of 2023. So a year and a half. It was fucking torture, Kevin. Torture.
Because you didn't know, right?
Yeah. Yep. And then my fucking lawyer, I don't have nice things to say about lawyers, so I'm just gonna. You remember that attitude I had when I was a kid? I was like, yeah, I'm gonna be a lawyer. Now I'm like, bro, yeah, okay, sure. So my lawyer, he misled me. Let's say that, because you're gonna sit here and tell me you're a criminal defense attorney, and you know that they convict 98% of their cases, 98%, and you're gonna sit here and be like, oh, you might not go to jail, you might not go to prison. You're going to sit here and tell me you actually think I might not go to prison?
You took him to trial, didn't you?
No, I didn't. I signed a plea deal.
Okay.
Right? So what happened was I signed a plea deal, but they were like, oh, they might give you house arrest, or he just it was false hope. It was false hope. So in that year and a half, October of 2022, that's when I get sentenced to 8 months. Like, you're going to jail, 8 months, boom. And then I had 3 months where I was like, all right, I started the podcast. I want to keep it going. So what I ended up doing was I recorded a bunch of episodes and I scheduled them all to premiere while I was gone. So if you didn't know me, you thought I was out in the street. You thought I was like podcasting and putting out. So yeah, I put together this master plan to like start to keep the podcast going without me. You know?
Yeah. So your podcast helps a lot of people. Your book has helped a lot of people. Can you talk a little bit about I understand why you started a podcast, but you know, kind of what the greater goal of your podcast is.
At first, it started as kind of like a self-help kind of podcast, but now it's morphed into something totally different. Now, like Ian has been a big inspiration, huge inspiration.
Ian
for me.
Bick.
Yeah. And I've seen like, there's so many stories, like what he does is super awesome. And there's so many versions of those stories that I have access to that the world has never heard. And I want people to see that, yeah, these stories are crazy, but we're not what you think we are. Like, people who go to prison, you can become friends and really like somebody who has been in prison for 15 years, because that's what happened to me. Before I went to prison, I was like, oh, if you're in prison, you kind of like, you walked into that. You know, that's kind of your problem.
Yeah.
And then I ended up in prison and I made friends with some people in there, and I was like, I'd be friends with this guy on the street.
Yeah. He's a nice guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, there are what I've learned since I started podcasting, and even since I got sober, there were things that I did in my past while I was drinking and drugging that, like, it could have gone the other way, and I could have gotten 10 years in prison or, you know, had to serve a sentence, just like anyone else that's been in the system. Fortunately did not get caught. But I'm no different. And I've realized that through podcast platforms like yourself, like Ian's, guests that I've had on my show. It's wild. And people judge, and people, you know, even people trying to get jobs after prison or jail, and they have a record and they can't. It's like, well, how do you expect someone to rehabilitate when they don't have a fighting chance?
100%. Yeah, it's turned me onto a whole nother side of society that, like, there's a lot of good people that keep making bad decisions because they feel like no one gives a fuck about them. I met a lot of really good people. So I go to prison in January of 2023, and I go through the whole experience. Like, I get there, I get strip searched, all that shit. And then I'm thrown in prison. It's a prison camp, so it's like the best possible prison you can go to.
For sure.
But it's fucking prison, bro.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you only did 8 months. Fuck you. You go do 8 months in federal prison. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm there, and this kind of starts happening to me. Like, I'm just one of them. They put us all together in the same place. Mind you, I'm supposed to be with the white collar criminals, bro. I'm in there with drug dealers. I'm in there with like guys who are in there on gun charges. You know, I'm in there with some real guys, real gangster street guys from like Puerto Rico and Miami. So right around this time is when I meet Ross. I met Ross maybe 2 weeks into my bid.
He was in the same.
Yeah, in the same prison.
No way.
That's how we met.
You guys met in prison?
It took me a while to
No way.
We met in prison. Yeah.
Okay, so you guys meet one another.
Yeah.
You become close.
At first, it's just cordial. We talk maybe 2 or 3 times, and he actually gets shipped out. He gets sent home like 2 weeks into my bid.
Okay.
Yeah. So at first, not really, because we didn't get the chance to talk. So what ends up happening is I become really good friends with the kid that introduces us. And that kid I got introduced to, I ran into like 2 people I knew in there, which was weird. But they introduced me to this group of guys. One of them was really good friends with Ross. I stayed in contact with that guy. We're still really good friends. And then he introduces me to Ross later when we get out. So that's kind of like how that whole thing happened. But prison was an interesting experience in many ways.
Were you ever tested in prison?
Like by other people?
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, very subtle. It's subtle. It's more subtle because it's not that prison isn't as aggressive.
Yeah.
But you got to catch the subtlety.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
A guy will ask you for a favor. Then he'll ask you for another one. Then he'll ask to borrow money. And they keep coming back to you. And they keep coming back to you. And they keep coming back to you. Luckily, I had grown up in Miami and I was around characters.
Street smart.
So I kind of caught it early.
Yeah.
You know, and I would just be like, man, I don't have any money, bro. Sorry.
Yeah.
You know? Or my bad, bro. Yeah, I can't. I don't have, I know you like this old brown. No, I don't have any brownies, bro. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I kind of I'd let people think whatever they wanted to think of me, but I wouldn't get caught in the bullshit.
You wouldn't let them too close either.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I have a way about me. I don't know how. God gave me this special ability to make friends with people who nobody makes friends with.
Yeah.
You know, I made friends with this guy named Spoon in there. Spoon ran like the black dudes. He was like the head of that shit. And he was actually a very notorious gangster in Miami for many years. And me and him became good friends. So yeah. He still calls me from prison every once in a while, that kind of stuff. But yeah.
So if you could go back and give one piece of advice to the Nelson who was presented with the insurance scheme, what would be that piece of advice for the listener that's in that position right now?
It would be hard because I am where I am today because I went to prison.
Ooh.
You know what I mean? So it's really hard. A part of me is like, don't do it. I know why I did it, because I was impatient, because I was desperate, because I was arrogant. The things I would tell myself is like, oh, you deserve to make more money. Forget how you make it. Just make it. Who gives a shit? You're not hurting anybody. All the excuses anybody would tell themselves. But at the same time, I am where I am right now, and I have the people in my life right now because I went to prison. If I don't go to prison, I don't meet Ian. I don't meet you, right? Like me, I find Ian after I got out. Like Ian, somebody showed me his podcast right after I got out. And then I DM'd him, and that's how I ended up on his show. So if I don't go to prison, I have nothing to talk about. Like, I don't have a story. And the story is everything.
Right.
You know? So a part of me, which is funny, my lack of patience drove me to break the law. And prison forced me to become patient. Right? So in there, it's like, it's not up to you, bro. Things happen. Things take time in there. Everything takes forever. Everything is a process. And it just forced me to slow down.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes prison taught me sometimes things are not up to you.
Yeah.
You don't like it? Too bad.
Yeah.
You got to learn how to be patient. And patience is so key because we live in this microwave mentality world, you know, and people aren't patient, you know. So if you gain that virtue and you're able to force yourself to be patient in situations where it's hard to be, you have an advantage over other people.
Oh, it's a tool. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just like a superpower.
Yeah. Temperance
in
is
today's
a big one.
day and age.
Oh my God. You know? Yeah, man.
Do you want to plug your podcast and your socials?
Sure. Yeah. So everybody follow me at Montana the Prophet on Instagram. That's my personal profile. We're doing a rebranding right now. It was formerly known as the Montana Method Podcast, but now it's called Honor Among Thieves. Check us out if you want to hear some cool criminal stories. But if you also want to get to learn the other side of humanity where people who fuck up and make mistakes are human. And yeah, some interesting stories that you won't see anywhere else. We'll talk about crime. We'll talk about prison, maybe some violent stories in there, and everything in between.
Awesome. Nelson, thank you so much for coming on.
Of course, brother.
And thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, man.